Hey there! In this month's edition of New Scientist dated June 4, 2021, there was an article that looked at the lack of motivation in people. It looks at what drives human behavior such as gene and environmental factors. Motivation with extrinsic and intrinsic factors are impacted by the perceived rewards. Chemical signals in the brain is another factor that affects motivation. If you are looking for more information on motivation, continue listening on as we go through the article. Why can I never be bothered? Some people seem to possess unlimited motivation, others not so much. Self-confessed slacker. I have had 3 weeks to write the words you are about to read, but they were written at the last possible minute. Why? I wasn't busy exercising. I haven't done that in months. My time was not spent at my book club or calligraphy class, because I'm not involved in anything of the sort. Nor did I procrastinate by mastering the ultimate sourdough loaf. Just the thought of it makes me want to lie down. Quite simply, I waited until the last minute because I could not be arsed. My condition is what's known colloquially among my generation as the kbase, the can't be arsts. In my case, it is chronic. I can't be arsed to go on a run. I can't be arsed to cook. I can't be arsed to reply to my emails. I'm not alone. According to a December 2020 survey by the Pew Research Center, 42% of people in Indiana, the U.S. aged between 18 and 49 say they have struggled to find the motivation to work since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. That still leaves half of the population who are fine, who get up and get on. Then there are those people who wake at 6 a.m. and run 10 kilometers before work. People who write their memoirs. People who wash their curtains. What are their secrets? Why do some people have so much drive and others, like me, so little? And is it possible for me to become a go-getter? To find out, I mustered the motivation to ask a few of the scientists who might know. Motivation is what drives much of human behavior. It is what turns goals into actions. Whether you are nipping to the fridge, writing an article, or setting off up a mountain. It is hardly surprising, then, that the process by which you become motivated involves various biological and psychological components, all in delicate interplay without external experiences of the world. In other words, it is complicated, and what lies behind individual differences is far from straightforward. It's the biggest question in the field, says Cal Murayama, who leads the Motivation Science Lab at the University of Tübingen in Germany. Could it be down to DNA? That would save me a lot of effort. If my laziness is baked into my genome, there is no point trying to change. Alas, Murayama quickly shoots me down. It's wrong to think that there is a motivation gene, he says. In most cases, traits are determined not by individual genes, but by constellations of genes. And besides, behavior tends to be shaped by what Murayama calls the long history of the interaction between inherent disposition and external environment. That's nature and nurture too. You and me. The relative impact of each is controversial. Ask most biologists and they will tell you that environment is the most important factor in determining people's behavior. But Robert Plomin, a geneticist at King's College London, argues that our genes play a more important role than many like to think, pointing to twin studies as evidence. That seems to be the case for one sort of motivation. In 2015, a study of 13,000 sets of twins from 6 countries, all aged between 9 and 16, found that 40 to 50% of the differences in DNA motivation to learn could be explained by genetics. There are personality differences that people inherit that have a major impact on motivation, said Stephen Petrill at The Ohio State University. One of the authors of the study, at the time That still means that more than half of the differences in the motivation of these children can be attributed to their environment. The problem is that it is impossible to create a checklist of experiences that produce go-getters. The variables are too vast. Even something seemingly straightforward, like socioeconomic status, is more complicated than it seems. You might think people who experience hardship might be more motivated to succeed professionally, for example. But we can't say. We know surprisingly little about how differences in opportunities impact human motivation, says Taylai Sharrow, a neuroscientist at University College London. Anticipating rewards. If we are looking for the fundamental differences between shirkers and strivers, we can at least look at how we perceive rewards. Regardless of whether we are talking about motivation being driven by satisfaction within, intrinsic motivation, or by the promise of external rewards, extrinsic motivation, Sharrow says that motivated and unmotivated individuals differ in their reward sensitivity. Some get a greater kick out of rewards, whether it is the internal buzz after exercise or the warmth you get from praise. The same reward, let's say £100, actually feels like £1,000 to one person, but only feels like £10 to the other, says Sharrow. The person who feels they are working for £1,000 will be more motivated and work harder. We also have different expectations about how rewarding things will be. Two people might have the same reward sensitivity, both feel amazing when they get praise, but one might struggle to predict this reward. What I expect to happen is hugely important in me deciding what I'm about to do, says Sharrow. Using her analogies, it seems that I'm the type of person who expects 10p rewards and feels them as 5p rewards. Could that have something to do with the way my brain processes rewards? Neuroscientists have found that when rodents receive a reward, specialized cells in a brain region called the ventral tegmental area fire up, passing the message on to cells in another region, the nucleus accumbens, to release the neurotransmitter dopamine. More recent experiments have demonstrated an intimate connection between dopamine and motivation. When John Salamone et the University of Connecticut reduced dopamine levels in the brains of rats, for example, the animals settled for a smaller pile of food rather than go for a larger stash placed behind a barrier. The results have been corroborated in humans several times. Dopamine deficient? This makes sense when you consider that many people who experience depression report a dearth of motivation. There is some evidence that depressed individuals show a blunted brain activation in the nucleus accumbens to expected reward, says Trevor Robbins at the University of Cambridge, although he says that depression is much more complicated than that. Can I blame a lack of dopamine for my unwritten memoirs and unwashed curtains? Robbins says there are individual differences in dopamine function, but insists it isn't as simple as more dopamine equaling greater drive. For one thing, the effects of dopamine seem to depend on where in the brain spikes occur. Brain imaging studies in humans have found that while people who are willing to work harder for rewards have higher release of dopamine in areas of the brain known to play a role in motivation, people who are less willing to work hard had similarly high levels in another brain region associated with emotion and risk perception. The neuroscience of motivation still contains any mysteries. Last year, Carmen Sandy at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne and her colleagues found that the ratio of two compounds, glutamine and glutamate, in the nucleus accumbens predicted the extent to which people were able to stay motivated during a physically demanding task. Glutamate is the major excitatory neurotransmitter, and glutamine is its precursor. So the ratio between the two can indicate the capacity a person has to produce glutamate on demand and thus get engaged during motivated behavior. What Sandy found is that participants with a particular balance of these Compounds were more motivated to keep going than others. Sandy says that we know very little about why the ratio might differ between individuals. She is planning to investigate the connection between levels of certain compounds and changes in motivated behaviors. But she isn't expecting results anytime soon. These are not high-throughput experiments, says Sandy. In the meantime, maybe there are other interventions that motivationally challenged people like me might consider. If the neurobiology of motivation boils down to chemical signals, to what extent can we hijack them to boost drive? Rachel Allison Adcock at Duke University in North Carolina studies how non-invasive neuro stimulation can target the brain circuits involved in motivation. She has demonstrated that people can self-activate their ventral tegmental area, triggering dopamine spikes elsewhere, without the offer of external rewards. The trick was to give participants neurofeedback training, in which they look at real-time displays of their brain activity to see if they could affect its function. The results were impressive. People who did the training were able to sustain stimulation and, encouragingly, showed increased connectivity in their reward pathways. That seems like good news. It at least demonstrates that it is possible to hack your brain's reward systems. And there is no need to worry if you, like me, don't have anyone to hand that can give you neurofeedback training, because there are various solo techniques that could help, from visualizing your future self to avoiding positive thinking. Diet of champions. What you eat might also be a factor. Could it be that my diet of chocolatey cereal, cheese sandwiches and crisps is depriving my brain of the ingredients required to generate drive? If I'm in a clinical setting, and someone hasn't got any motivation, I would start to look at what their protein intake looked like, says nutritional therapist Jackie Lynch. Complete proteins like meat, fish, eggs and soya contain all the essential amino acids that work together to create core neurotransmitters such as noradrenaline, which can help keep us motivated. She adds that unmotivated people may also be deficient in B vitamins, also found in protein-rich foods and others, like bananas, oats, and milk, which convert what we eat into glucose to give us energy. When I'm dealing with someone in your situation, says Lynch, the only thing I'll ask them to do after that first consultation is add protein in. Add hummus to toast, for instance, or pumpkin seeds to cereal. All of which seems reasonable. Then she says the dreaded word, exercise. Many studies have demonstrated that exercise can improve our cognitive functions and enhance brain dopamine synthesis. The problem is that, like diet and motivation, exercise and motivation can have a cyclical relationship. You have to be motivated to get moving in the first place. In 2018, Mathieu Boisgontier, a neuroscientist at the University of Ottawa in Canada, looked into a paradox involving exercise. Even though the vast majority of us intend to be physically active, many don't do any exercise at all. Boisgontier and his colleagues found that the brain has to exert more effort to avoid sedentary behaviors. This led him to conclude that humans have an automatic attraction to effort minimization. I'm thrilled. Boisgontier argues that our brains evolved this way because the energy savings gave us a survival advantage. But by organizing our time in a way that forces us to be active, he says, by planning your journey to work so it involves a walk, for example, we can overcome our automatic attraction to physical laziness. Once we exercise consistently and develop a habit, we enter a virtuous cycle in which it takes fewer cognitive resources to motivate ourselves to work out. After my call with Boisgontier, I don't go for a run. I am, after all, automatically attracted to minimizing effort. Instead, I call Greg Gostinar, a self-described biohacker and founder of Your Inception, a company that researches and tests nootropics, supplements claimed to help improve Brain power including motivation. His team ranks nootropics based on their ingredients and quality, before testing them in people and measuring the effects with a brain training game. Gostanar has personally tested more than 50 of them. One left him vomiting for quite some time. Another made him feel high. But he credits nootropics with helping to turn his life around. I'm able to get in this flow state, he says. I'm able to focus and stay focused for much longer than ever before. Gostanar is realistic. Based on my experience, I'd say 90% or even more of supplements either don't work, are underdosed or contain at least one risky compound. Although some studies have shown that a few nootropics or at least certain ingredients within them can boost cognitive performance, many on the market have never been studied in a clinical setting. Clearly, there are no quick fixes. The reasons I can't be arsed are many and complicated, and some may be set in stone. And although I have the power to boost my own motivation, I'm left with a cruel, universal truth: diet and exercise matter. I sprinkle some sunflower seeds on my cereal, boil an egg and go for a long walk. Or at least I think about it. Whether I can become a go-getter in the long term remains to be seen. But hey, for now, just look at all these words.